Like, yeah, and it's just like, how do you think the thing went after?
It went all right. One concern I was kind of.
All right. Welcome, everyone. How are you guys doing?
Good.
We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Objectivity Through the Black Lens. I'm Rachel Lloyd. I'm the co-chair of NABJ here.
And I'm Alexandria Fuller, also the co-chair of NABJ.
All right, so tonight we brought together 4 incredible Black journalists from the Bay Area. They're going to talk about their experiences facing complex issues, especially working in this industry. As we all know, it's difficult with the presidential administration that we have right now, the political climate, and the circulation of misinformation. And then on top of that, we're Black journalists, right? So we have another layer. And our burden is, of course, different from the burden of other reporters. So we just thought it would be best to talk about some of the issues, like with national reporters like April Ryan of the White House, or the White House correspondent being criticized, and the Dallas traffic anchor Demetria Obelar also being criticized. We just want to talk about reporters and what their work is like in the field, and hopefully get some advice from them about what we can do as emerging reporters.
And so it is my pleasure to have among us 4 notable journalists who will lead our important and overdue conversation tonight. In the middle we have Millie Jefferson of Audible, who is one of our own as a current lecturer of the Advanced Audio Podcasting course here at the J School. Some of her work includes, but is not limited to, pitching and piloting production of original audio shows that touch upon a wide variety of issues.
Let's give it up for Millie.
Next, we have provocative East Bay columnist Otis Taylor of the San Francisco Chronicle, whose work has focused on marginalized communities like immigrant detainees who are facing discrimination within Richmond prison systems, as well as police brutality. Also, we have pioneer sports writer Marcus Thompson of the Athletic Bay Area, who has spent 10 seasons covering the Golden State Warriors. He is also the author of Golden, The Miraculous Rise of Steph Curry.
Special shout out to Marcus. We know you're missing the
Warriors.
Right
This is rough.
And lastly, we have documentary powerhouse Dawn Porter, who is the founder and producer of Trilogy films. She has directed notable documentaries like Gideons Army that follows the personal stories of 3 young public defenders challenging the criminal justice system of the Deep South. Unfortunately, Dawn couldn't physically be with us today, but here she is via video conference, and she had to reschedule a sound check for her upcoming Netflix series. We all know the grind doesn't stop, but we are delighted to still have her among part of our conversation tonight. And panelists, if you have any questions directed towards Dawn, please start by addressing her, and then we can give a cue so she knows to answer. And Dawn, if you want to interject during a question, please let us know.
Great. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to open up the panel with a question for all of our speakers. We'll start from left to right, and then Dawn, you'll answer last, just so we're consistent. So our first question is, how do you see your role as a Black journalist different from other journalists? And we'll start with you.
You start with me. That's a really interesting question because I cover like largely Black people. So many times it's to speak that secret language we have in the locker room, right? I'm the decipherer. So I think people look to me to do that. It's interesting that I got the NBA beat. I remember Matt Steinmetz was the beat writer, and when I got the job, I was a high school writer. He would always say, "You're coming for my job. You're coming for my job." And I always wondered why they thought I would want a basketball beat, right? Even though I did, but I'm like, why? What if I want to cover baseball? But I think it's really grown a lot. It's really interesting because so many, I read and hear about so many people who try to say, I just want to be considered a journalist, right? I remember asking Cam Newton at the Super Bowl, like, does he feel proud about being in the legacy of black quarterbacks? And he's like, man, I just want to be seen as a quarterback. Man, I always wanted to be a black journalist, right? Even when I misunderstood what black meant. So I was the dude who was like at a high school girls lacrosse game with my hat to the back in George Zone because I wanted you to know that I was a black journalist in the building. So for me, it's kind of morphed and grown over the years into first my presentation, and then secondarily, how I represent myself in my community, and now it's just become telling stories that matter, trying to decipher the world for a bunch of black athletes who really do have something to say, and it's just growing. When Kaepernick calls me, it's like, hey, I'm doing. This is my black card. I'm gonna play it.
Would you say that would distinguish your role as a black journalist?
Yeah, I mean, he was literally looking for somebody he thought could explain it properly and say it. And he's like, I know you can do it. I don't want anybody else here. And I know other people was not happy about it, but that's where I was like, oh, okay, this is real right now. This is like Jackie Robinson. We need somebody around to write about this stuff. So I kind of have to embrace it, and it's been an interesting journey.
So near all of my journalism career, I've been a part of newsrooms that weren't very diverse. So in addition to doing, I'm a producer, so mostly producing hosts, being a producer partner with reporters. A lot of what I did in newsrooms was to make sure that we were getting all sides of the story, to make sure that the tape that we were getting in the stories that we were putting out were representative and fair, and didn't color people in an unfortunate light just because my colleagues had limited experiences working with maybe some of the populations that they are covering. So for me, it's different because I always have my ears perked up. I'm always listening to what voices are being used. I'm always paying attention to the people who are telling the stories. And I'm a person that, it can be burdensome, but I also feel like it's my responsibility that if I am in the room, whether I'm one of a group or by myself, that it's my job to raise the flags and to say, in a healthcare story that's a national story affecting everyone, we don't always have to have people of color that have diabetes. They have other health challenges, or they have no health challenges, or maybe they are one of the young people who is not sick and doesn't want to participate. And I think that oftentimes, depending on your life experiences or where you're from, you're not an evil or a bad person, that's not your experience. So you don't know to look for something other than what you maybe consume in media or what you've always thought or what you grew up with. So I see my responsibility and my role as a little bit different to kind of make sure that the stories that are being told are really being told from multiple perspectives, that there are multiple voices, and that we are really kind of, in the case of public media where I worked for a long time, that it's really like public media, that it's stories for everyone, being told by everyone, with voices from everyone.
Otis?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Absolutely. How do you see your role as a black journalist different from the role of other journalists?
Okay, so I don't know if I can answer that as I think my role, just me personally, not as a black journalist, but my role is personal to me, and I guess that relates to my experience as a human being. I want to speak to and for the underrepresented, and I feel that part of my job here in the Bay Area is to present context to situations. For example, when dozens of youths robbed a BART train at the Coliseum station, the easy easy response was, these are just some black kids who are no good, they have nothing illegal going on. That's not necessarily what the video tape of the incident showed. But still, why are people so quick to blame blackness for this? Well, when you think about it, where are these kids from? They're from Oakland. Oakland has a history of redlining the black neighborhoods, has a history of predatory lending for black neighborhoods. Oakland has a history of disenfranchising its black and brown population. That's my job, I think, to show you that context, that if you grow up in an area that has been disenfranchised purposefully, and you don't have anything in that neighborhood, you are going to reach out and lash out and take what you can. So I don't know if that's me being black or whatever, but I want to give voice to the underrepresented and bring them to the conversation, because I don't think that has happened enough, if at all.
And before Dawn answers, we want to show a clip from Gideons Army.
Let me actually answer first, and you can show the clip, and then I can explain a little bit more.
Sounds good.
I very much, I'd love to take pieces of what each of the prior panelists have said, because I feel so much like those are my motivations. And you know, one thing that's probably different for me than from print journalism is I have pictures to show. And the images that we see of black and brown people throughout the media are so monolithic and so easily fall into stereotypes. And there's two kinds of problems with what we see a lot. One is, we all know, like, the black people are violent and dangerous, the scary music comes up, there's no context, they're not fully human, they're like background, you know. So I love to center black and brown people in stories where you may not have put them before. And you know, part of that, though, it has to come naturally. You can't force that. But if you look, we are there. And so I feel like the things I'm attracted to are where we're there, but we weren't discussed before. So I did a film about abortion rights. You know, abortion access affects black women 3 times as likely as labor. And yet the people that you see are always white women protesting, and there's a long history of stuff. So you know, it was very easy to, you could throw a rock and find some great characters that were doing that. So that's a lot of what I see. The second problem is the well-meaning white person who finds black people like romantic a little bit, and you know, can kind of sometimes give people a pass. Sometimes you're just a fool, you know. And so I think for all of you, don't be taken by the fool. You know, some people will, and I think sometimes, you know, journalists of a different race are loath to like criticize or really push their characters. And I push my characters, you know. I want to hear the truth, you know, as best as they can see it. So what this first clip is, if you play DeMontes and Brandy, you have that one,
Yes.
Okay, so I'll play this for you and then give you a little background. She's a young public defender. She's in her first couple of years of practicing. Her blackness is not central to that scene, but it's important. Because just by you're seeing somebody in authority, in charge, she's not in jail, she's trying to get people out of jail. You can kind of put on her what you will. Like, you know, you can ask the question of yourself and wonder if she feels a special responsibility or not. But that's not center to the scene. What's center is her emotion, is her having a 360 developed personality. And a lot of what we see in media are sketches or caricatures of people. And the more that we give people their full humanity, that is when you get to just more a real understanding, and you relate to people as a human being instead of you know, on specifically a racial level. So that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dawn. Next we want to talk about working in a predominantly white space. Every day we face criticism of our appearance, the stories we pitch, and the stories our bosses think we should cover. but it's our job as reporters to remain objective. So let's sort that out.
So we just want to go down the line and ask you, what's your work environment like? If you could just describe your work environment.
You been to Starbucks? I spend so much time in Starbucks, it's ridiculous. Oddly enough, I work in a predominantly black environment. Like, I'm in the locker room. It's loud, you know, it's hood. It's a trip. I remember being a young reporter, and like I told you, I would have my hat to the back, I would have my Jordans on me, straight up, like you pick a Too Short song, and I looked like I was listening to it. And on purpose, though, it was like by design, because I wanted people to see, like, if you're from East Oakland, you're gonna have these preconceived notions, and then I'm about to like make them wrong. I'm gonna disprove them right in front of you. So that was my bent. But I remember going into the locker room, and I had Air Force Ones. I don't know if y'all remember, Air Force Ones was like all the rage, these white Nikes. And I go into the locker room, and they will always talk about my attire. They would never talk about any other reporter's attire, but it was always mine. I used to have like real anxiety, like I would have to go school shopping for the season. Like for the season, I had to go shopping because these millionaires are gonna get on my little reporter clothes. But I walk in and Jason Richardson is like, it's time to get some new Air Force Ones. And you know, I toothbrush my stuff. My stuff was white. I'm like, what are you talking about? These are still fire. He was like, nah, they got the crease. Once they got the crease, you gotta throw them away. I was like, what? I was like, man, you need to give me some Nike money. Like, these are still good. But that's my experience, is like being around rich millionaires, like from the hood.
My experience, let's see, my group, I currently work at Audible. In my group of 50 people, I think I'm one of 4 people of color on the editorial team that's producing original audio content. I believe I'm the only person of color. And most of my public radio audio producing experience, I have been, if not the only person of color in the newsroom, one of no more than 5.
And can you just talk briefly, what does that feel like for you?
It's interesting. It is, you know, I spoke a little bit about kind of, I don't do so much news now, but when I did, just kind of the responsibility that I felt that I had, and that eventually others, you know, I guess, I don't know if they felt that I had it, but it was a way to make sure they weren't doing anything too egregious, because I would say like, oh, do you need that piece of tape? Or do you need to talk about this person this way? Or we've already heard that. I think that the one way that it really makes a difference is there are things that you will experience as a person of color at work in a predominantly white environment that you can't talk to anybody about because they don't understand. And you find yourself keeping a lot of things to yourself because no one understands basically things from your perspective because it's not happening to them. So it's hard to, I think it's easy if someone walks by and someone hears someone call you a derogatory name or a racial slur. It's like we all know what that is, and you know, we can respond to it. I once had a situation where a person high up in the company, I was the director of the live show, had a meeting. I wasn't in the meeting because I was directing the live show. I came out of the meeting, and my producer was, you know, excited to introduce me to this person because he was just raving about how great the show sounded. She's like, oh, I want to introduce you to Millie. She wasn't here because she was directing the live show, and you know, you were remarking in the meeting about how great the show sounded, and I wanted to introduce you to the person that made it all possible. And I stuck out my hand, and he put his hand in his pocket and looked up at the ceiling and looked around and then was like, well, I better go. And I was just like, is this happening right now? Is this happening right now? And I think that moment for me, my boss knew what was happening, but I was the only person in that moment, and at that time in that newsroom that knew what happened. And when I would tell people, because I was just like, did this happen? And it was like, well, maybe he made that response because he thought you were young. And I was like, definitely not that. Maybe he made that response because he was surprised that you were a woman. Also not that. They say my name on the show every week. And so it's moments like that that even though I told people and I was outraged, it was kind of like, yeah, well, you know, that's how he is. And it's just like, so I'm stuck with it.
His
And
hands must have been sweating.
he didn't want to embarrass himself. But there's moments like that, and you know, moments where you're questioning your promotion, you're questioning if your story ideas are being heard, you're questioning your very position in this place, and you don't have anyone to talk to about it. And journalism, I will say, unlike many other professions, is not a linear, there's no like real linear ascension. Like you've done this for 2 years, you're up for this promotion, now you're a junior partner, and then you're a partner. So that if you don't get promoted like you should, or things don't happen, you can look at it and say, well, this is odd. She's been in this position 3 years, she should be promoted, or her salary seems a little low for people at this level. There's all different ways that you can kind of make things the way that they are, and when you're the only person and you want to bring issues up, or you are looking for an advocate sometimes, it's very hard to, you know, it's like, oh, you're a nice person, I'm sure that that's not why you didn't get a raise. And it's like, well, actually, I wish there was someone here that I could talk to for real that could really look at it and could really do something about it. So, you know, in some respects, it's very isolating.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
No, I'm good this time. So I don't do the Starbucks, I do my room. I work by myself a lot. But when I do go to the newsroom, I make sure I speak to every other black person that's in there. And it's only 4 others, so it's like a quick run through the newsroom. And one of them I do like a podcast with where we talk about black things. So when I was hired at the Chronicle, I told them that I wanted to reconstruct some of their narratives that are in the Bay Area. For one, we think that this is just this really progressive society where everyone loves each other, and that's not the case. That's not the truth. In my own newsroom, I used this example earlier today that last November, a year ago, a black man was killed in El Sobrante. And the initial news reports was it was by 3 white men. And then of course, you know, it gets out of the area, it's 3 men, you know, they're with the KKK. You know, this is the post-Trump hysteria. But in my newspaper, they described the man who had died with a bullet wound to his head on a street as a black man without any criminal convictions or gang affiliations. And that pissed me off to no end. Because how is this man, you have the names of the suspects and they're just, you know, of Richmond, of, you know, like, they have some criminal history, why don't we be talking about that? So that fired me up. But when I got hired, I told them just point blank that I want to talk about these things that we have ignored for so long. And I want to actually call each other in the newsroom to task, because I think so many times. Another time, there were those, another example I used today, there was the white kids, you know, in their 20s who had killed a jogger in Golden Gate Park, and we wrote a story about how, you know, their lives went wayward, and, you know, they were, you know, good kids until this happened. And it's like, do we give anyone else the benefit of the doubt, people of color? And no, we don't. So I feel that it's incumbent on me to introduce that kind of thinking in the newsroom, especially right now when we're talking about immigration. Like until I began to push, I don't think we're doing stories from the perspective of the immigrants. Like, what are they feeling? Not what, and also every story. Sorry, I'm about to go on a tangent.
Do it briefly.
I'll come back to it. I'll come back to it. Yeah, I was about to go off. Okay. I'm getting centered. Okay, I'm back. Trust issues.
We're gonna go to you, Dawn.
I first started out as a lawyer in a Washington DC law firm, and I was the only Black associate, and then there was one Black partner in that particular office. So, you do what you need to do. You do your work and you try and be really great at your work and friendly. And for the most part, that was fine. There weren't that many overt, I think we all take in the microaggressions, and it's like you stop counting them or else you would be crazy, right? So, that was on the whole pretty darn good. Like for where I was treated well. I got good cases. I got good assignments. Mostly because I'm fun, and I was like pleasant to work with. So that was good. Then I went to ABC News. There was one other Black lawyer there, which was great. And then I got hired. I got hired into the news. I started in legal, and I went to the news division, where there was a very small group of Black reporters. And, they all had the same issues, which would eventually kind of bubble up, that they weren't getting the right stories. There was one reporter with very dark skin, and he would constantly get complaints about, like, well, we can't see you or something. I'm like, isn't that your job to see him? Not his job to lighten his skin for you? Like, what do you want him to do? And there was a really interesting thing. Like, I realized that they were very happy to take my editorial suggestions as long as I would stay in my lane and not claim them. But that wasn't going to get me anywhere. So now, I started my own company, and you'll see a lot of women and minorities are in documentary film because there's no green light really for us. If you can hustle and raise your money and just keep at it, it is possible. It's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, but you can leapfrog. So now I have people from my former job saying, like, do you want to work with me? I'm like, you MFs would never have hired me in a million years. And so I said that at the Berkeley, the Logan Symposium last year. They said, why did you start your own company? And I said, because none of you in this audience would hire me. So I had to figure it out myself. And I did. And that's why I also feel, going back to the first question, a really special responsibility to say, I'm going to use I'm going to let my perspective shine through. And now, I still get things like you have to kind of step up your I'm a boss, persona sometimes. But I have 2 teenagers, so I'm pretty good at that when I need to. But I save it, I'm not constantly I don't have anything to prove, so I fired people who I felt like didn't respect me. There's the bro mentality, and you only gotta do that once. And people it circulates, if you act up, she will fire you. And you don't want to be fired, so, it's just like the rest of life, right? We live in a society that we can't construct. I wish it was different, but I have a lot more autonomy now. And that's probably why I'm so happy doing what I do.
Good. I mean, before we move on to our next question, I just want to kind of sum up. So we have from areas of predominantly white spaces where you're kind of isolated and you're timid and you might touch a little bit on what we should do or hint at things to just trying to break the ceiling. Even though we're the minority in those places, we still have to speak out, because if we weren't there, they would continue to report on the victim who had died and what his criminal background was, than to completely just breaking out and doing your own thing. So I mean, we have options here. You know, it's not completely hopeless. So.
And I would say, I want to add, I would say that even in times when I'm the only, like, I'm not scared, you know, I definitely make it known. So I think, you know, I often spoke to young journalists that I would come in contact with, and it's like, of course, your first year of your first internship, you're gonna be scared to say something because you don't know the playing field, right? But as I went on in my career, it just was like, I mean, what's the worst that, you know, like what's the worst that can happen? Either I'm gonna sit here and feel uncomfortable, or I'm gonna feel uncomfortable but let everybody know what's going on and what's not right. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, you know.
Get that experience that you need from that particular position and then move on.
You know, I mean, it's a really, really important point because, you know, the people who are, like, this business that we are in is a business of relationships. And if you don't have relationships with the people with the power, you're not, you know, the first speaker, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, Mr. Nike.
Marcus.
So Mr. Nike is using his resources to get access to his subjects. And whatever field you're in, the most of your contacts. I have a lot of great contacts now, but you pick your battles, like for a couple reasons. One is, it's exhausting to list all the things that you would change every single time. It's exhausting. And I think we have to relieve ourselves of that burden. I can't always be the black girl in the room, but I can determine which ones cannot go by, which ones maybe I could take somebody aside and say, you know, I didn't want to embarrass you, but like that's kind of messed up. You know, and then which ones you may not be happy about it, you let those go, and people respect you and they respect your work, and you know, targeted criticisms are well taken because people feel like you're doing this for the benefit of your organization. I mean, for the Chronicle, it's a benefit to not having them discuss people in a messed up way. You know, like all us readers I'm reading it and saying the same thing. Why are you talking about the victims? Why are you have to describe him as not a criminal? You think we default to criminal?
Absolutely.
So now I don't have to write that letter.
And we're gonna move on to our next question.
So journalists have the responsibility to root out biases, but do you ever feel you are typecasted or pressured by your superiors to report on issues related to the Black community? And Dawn, if you want to interject, just let us know. For this question, we need 1 to 2 panelists to answer.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be all 4.
Yeah.
Just one if you want to pop in.
I'll just say, I'm so tired of writing about the take a knee. Like every time something happens, they're like, Marcus, hey black dude, we need you to write this.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, can somebody else write?
Yeah.
Like I'm not the only one. Like 17 times I wrote about that.
I mean, talk a little bit about that. Like, was it okay? Like, were you excited to write about it the first time it happened?
No, you know, the hard part is, you know, like she was saying, there's such a burden. And I remember a long time ago, I wrote about I remember Richard Sherman went off on, who was it, Aaron Andrews or somebody next to him?
Yeah.
And they were calling him thug. And I wrote, like, I know real thugs, like, y'all got this wrong. Like, this dude is not a thug, right? He's like a smart dude with a master's degree from Stanford. Like, he's not the one. Man, my email has never been so lit. Like, and so that's why I hesitate to write about it because it's such an emotional and personal thing. Like, it's like fighting off zombies in your email and on Twitter. It's like, at some point, it's like, I know when I write it, the crazies are coming, you know, and they're calling me all kind of names, and then I'm East Oakland, and I want to punch them all, and I don't know how to let it go. So that's why I kind of don't like doing it, because there's this burden to say, this needs to be said, and I'm going to say it, and because of that, I got to deal with the legions of zombies who got something to say about it.
But do you feel like even with the trolls who are going to attack you on your writing, is it still your responsibility to speak up about it?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I also feel like you other people need to say something too, because now I'm the race baiter, right? And it's like, I can pick my spots. If my new standard is, if I'm upset about it or feel strong enough about it to talk my wife's ear off about it, then I'll write about it. If she ain't like, would you shut up about it, then
You're not
somebody else
attached.
need to write about it. That's my standard.
I think one of the other disadvantages is that, for example, Black people are not all the same. We haven't had the same experiences. I once had a boss read a New York Times article and ask me if I code switch. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, I don't know, I'm just reading this article and it says that like when Black people aren't at work, they speak slang with their friends and
That's
family.
all Black people.
And I was like, well, I'm from the Valley, so I'm not really sure that I'm the right person to ask about that, because pretty much how I communicate with you is how I communicate, and maybe I use some slang, but probably not at work, but I can't be your authority on everything that you think Black people are and everything that you think they're not. Like, I can tell you when your coverage is off, when you haven't included all the voices you need, but like, I can't help you if you want a certain experience that I haven't had, because we all haven't had the same experience. And I think that's something that's unfortunate when Black people or people of color are typecast or put on certain paths. It's like they're supposed to answer for people that look like them, but maybe they haven't had the same experience at all. So it's kind of, you're cheated in that respect.
I want to say that I don't even have to raise my hand now. Like something Black comes through San Francisco, they're gonna holler at me.
Automatically.
Even though I'm the East Bay columnist, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who was in town, they were like, yo, can you do the interview? It's like, of course, like, cause I want to shepherd and make sure that he is represented correctly in the San Francisco Chronicle. Wesley Lowery's book dropped, and a book about the prison industrial complex. Yeah, they'll just hit me up, because, I mean, I'm game for it, but I see it as that I'd rather shepherd it than let someone who is gonna side-eye it or not give it the full weight. Like, I want you to read Coach's book before you interview him, and then, like, which we didn't talk about anything in the book, but still, you know, we had a conversation, you know, it wasn't just, let me give you these boilerplate questions. And I think our readers are going to be better for it, because it's not just a boilerplate, like, you know, are you hopeful questions? You know, no, it's like, let's talk about why you feel this way. How'd you get to this first white president? Like, that's what I think is, gives people a better understanding of the Black experience. But I will agree with Millie Rock and
Not Millie.
what Dawn said about, we are not monolithic.
Right.
We are 4 different people right here, and just don't, when you see one, you can't just be like, oh, everyone's like that, but that's how some people look at us, and that's why.
And Dawn, I don't want to leave you out for this question, but we just wanted to have 1 or 2 panelists talk about that. You can start off the next question.
Okay.
So on the flip side to that, how do you pitch stories about Black communities that we want to share, like not the stereotypical ones? Millie, you mentioned that a little bit, without seeming biased or without seeming like that Black journalist just wants to cover those Black stories. How do you pitch stories that we care about that aren't stereotypical? And you can start, Dawn.
You know, I think this is part of having a little more control over what you do. So to kind of blend the 2 questions, you know, I'm at a point in my career where people bring things to me, like, are you interested? So I do get a lot of, like, here's an empowered Black woman kind of story, you know, and I love them, but I want to make sure, I don't want someone to tell me I can't cover an interesting white person. So I don't say to any white journalist, you can't cover the Black community. What I do say is what I would say to myself. If I'm an outsider, and that also can include sections of the Black community, I am an outsider. I am not from East Oakland. So I need to have input from people to say, like, what, you know, to help me think through what I'm seeing, or to just give me notes on things. But I do think that if you're good at what you do, and people like your writing or your audio journalism programs, you can, you know, the resistance gets less and less, because they start to believe that you are tapped into something. I think there's also an appetite for stories. Right after the election, right after the Trump election, I got in a big fight in public at a panel with a writer from Variety who said, what we now need to do is understand the Trump voters. And I was like, I've been in Alabama and Mississippi like over the last 6 years. I understand the Trump voters. You're welcome to do that if that's what you would like to do, but don't tell me to do it. You know, I'm gonna keep making stories about the people that I find interesting, or the people who are surviving despite the Trump voters. So I think, you know, like anything, the better you are at what you do, the more control you have over what you have. I haven't found resistance to pitching stories about, you know, those films sell really well, and around the world they sell. There's a curiosity about worlds you don't know, so.
I think one of the, I'm working for a national business show for a long time. One of the things that I found a delightful challenge was to always pitch stories that I felt matter, that I knew fit squarely within the mission of the show, that you couldn't say no to. For example, there's two that really blew the socks off of everyone, and I was like, oh, everybody doesn't know this. I pitched a story that working at the post office was a pathway to the middle class for a lot of Black people. No one in my newsroom seemed to know that, and I was like, well, I guess we're doing a story about how the post office, you know, and the news hook is when they were talking about like closing the post office, winding down for Saturday delivery, it's like, well, who will this impact? I have a unique perspective. What about all the people who use the post office jobs and federal jobs as a pathway to the middle class, because, you know, the federal government is supposed to be our one employer that doesn't discriminate. So it was a pathway for people to get homes and jobs and send their kids to college. Another story that I'm incredibly proud of that only I could pitch, I feel, was when Morris Brown of the University of Atlanta was going through bankruptcy. It's like, what does a college going through bankruptcy even look like? What does selling off buildings on a college look like? Are foreign governments buying them? What is that story? That is a story for a national business show. That's about bankruptcy, that's about higher education, that's about the people in the community that it impacts. So I found it a pleasant challenge to wait until the end of the pitch meeting and pitch 3 stories that I know no one else had. That when my friends heard them on Marketplace, they would be like, I know that was you. And I would be like, of course that was me. But other people who didn't know it was me found that it was a story that Marketplace should be telling. So I think that you can work within whatever parameters you have, because you do have a unique experience and perspective, so you are gonna find stories that no one else will be thinking about.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so next we're gonna step outside of the newsroom and talk about your work in the field, specifically dealing with like the presidential attacks on media legitimacy, which has also led to outward racism and these crazy rallies. So yeah, and we'll talk about how that affects our day-to-day coverage.
Yeah, so there have been some pretty radical rallies from Charlottesville to here in the Bay Area. So how do we responsibly cover these stories?
And Otis, I know you have some experience, so how about you kick it off?
Sure. So on November, what was the election on the 8th?
Yes.
So students from Berkeley decided to march down Telegraph. And I was like, yeah, I was in San Francisco. I'm gonna come over here. It was like, it should be kind of interesting. And I remember I arrived, so it was probably like on 32nd Street in Oakland. I parked my car and got out, and there were these men and women with bandanas on, black clothing, surrounded a photographer. And they were trying to get her camera. Now this is a woman, and these people are being really menacing. So I just step in, and this woman was like, you know, you can't, you know, in her mask, you can't do this, you can't do this. Like, don't touch me, right? And the dude was like, reached and tried to grab the woman who I didn't know, and like tried to pull her down, just smacked him, right? It's like, you're not gonna do that. Like, no, we're not assaulting people here. The same thing happens when you're covering an alt-right rally. I mean, journalists can be targets in this mix. Me, I'm fine, like, do what you want, I'm just covering, but don't touch me or my people, or we're gonna have a problem. And I thought that, I feared for that woman and myself at that point. But what I've tried to do by covering the protests, particularly the alt-right rallies, I've tried to talk to them. And actually, I'm done talking to them now. I've come to the realization, if you voted for Trump, like, we don't have much to talk about. And I don't need to understand your thinking because you voted for a racist, bigot, misogynist, serial assaulter of women. I was about to say a cuss word. So, we don't have much to talk about. But when they were protesting in Berkeley, it'd be everything but a sensible line. I mean, they're just parroting what the president is saying. I mean, a lot of these protesters that would set up on the park would have none of their own thoughts. There was a guy who was, when Aaron Coulter was supposed to come, and he made this beautiful shield, and it was like a nice piece of craftsmanship. And he kept telling me, I just want to make it home to see my daughters. And I was like, so why are you in Berkeley? And his response was, free speech. And I was like, yeah, okay. So you're coming to protect free speech with this beautiful shield here. Why do you need a shield to protect free speech if people are just talking? Well, because, the left. And I was like, you just see you guys out here right now. It's just the right with your knee pads and your shields and your helmets. How are you telling me that this does not look like you're coming to go to war? Well, yeah, that's true, but, we're getting attacked, America. And I was like, no one's attacking you right now, man, but you drove 2 hours away to wear a shield, and you're saying you hope you make it safe to your daughter? Like, if you really cared, then just stay home with your daughters,
Now, Otis, I have a follow-up question. You said you tried to talk to the alt-right, and now you just don't. What about people who criticize that you have to talk to the alt-right to get a balanced story?
Again, if you support a man who is blatantly against me and people of my color, black and brown people, he's against women, what do we have to talk about?
So if you're not going to talk to people on the alt-right, how do you still responsibly cover that rally or cover things that they're doing?
I don't cover it. Their message is nothing but hate. I've already made my stance on that hate speech. It's unnecessary. It's not doing anything good. So I'm off that. I want to talk to people whose lives this regime, and I'm not calling administration, this regime is impacting. So that's how I'm doing my part in, not necessarily resistance, but in trying to live my life. There is nothing that a Trump supporter could say to me that would make me think that they're thinking rationally if they voted for him, unless they apologize and say, I made a mistake. At this point, we have nothing to talk about because you support this man, and this man is evil, and he's a detriment to everything I stand for. So I'm done.
And one other person,
I want to
yes.
say something about balance. I spent 8 years at ABC, and my job was Director of News Standards and Practices. So part of my job was to assure that the producers were giving a fair shot to whatever other side there was. We had the main character and also a fair shot. And what I learned in that time is balance is not equal column inch or screen time. It's effectively and fairly representing what people say. So, people say all the time, documentarians are one-sided and they only, talk to who they want to. I find that that's not true. You can accurately represent people by giving a accurate sense of what they've said. But I don't need to give them a platform. I don't need to make them sound better or less. Sometimes you're actually doing them a favor by not showing every single crazy thing they've said. And I think that can be the struggle, is to find a coherent spokesperson for somebody who's going with a shield to a free speech rally.
And we talked a little bit about this, but I want to talk briefly about the NFL protests. How do you tell a balanced or a responsible story related to those protests?
I'm not so concerned with, you know, traditional notions of balance, you know. I feel like there's 1,000 stories out there, you know, on one side. I'm just trying to make the playing field a little bit more even, you know. So my balance is actually adding to, if I was to actually, I'm gonna say this side and put them together, you know, I'm not, balance is saying, hey, here's a voice that's not being heard. Let's tell that, well, let's make sure that voice is in there to kind of give adequate balance. One of the things that I've learned is like, I used to think I escaped this stuff with sports. You know, like, I remember I was in college, it was like, you gotta write news. I was like, man, I ain't writing news. I'm writing sports, right? And it's funny because like, not that long ago, I felt like quitting because it just feels so trivial sometimes. Like you guys are writing real stuff, you know, you making movies, like, I'm writing about hoop. It's just like, dude, really? This is why you made it out? So you can write about basketball? So it's crazy to kind of see, like, all this happens, like when Steph's like, hey, we gotta talk. And he's like, got a shot to throw at Donald Trump. It's like, suddenly I'm in the middle of like a political beef between a basketball player and a president. Right? It's just like, yo, I just want to write hoop. No. But yeah, I just feel like there are a lot of voices in there, and my job for the balance of it is making sure there are more voices in there. So I don't have to be concerned about telling other. Look, there's plenty of white columnists, white reporters out there, right? And they'll tell their side. There's not that many of me, so I'm just trying to tilt it a little bit towards balance, which means I probably need to write a whole lot of stories about her just to make it kind of close to even. But if I spend some time trying to tell, you know, another side, like, it's already in balance.
Does anyone else want to comment on that?
I would just want to add, I think oftentimes when we're trying to craft stories, we get stressed out about what people will think that we've written a biased story. People will think that, you know, I think oftentimes journalists worry about revealing too much of themselves into something, and it's like you are a person, you do exist, and everyone comes to whatever story it is with whoever they are. Like, you can't necessarily check that you're a woman at the door if you're writing about abortion rights. I mean, there are going to be women journalists that write about that, and they're going to be able to get both sides. I think one thing in producing that I will do is oftentimes you can let the person, the other side, or however, speak for themselves, right? Maybe if I were writing something, I would say, and then I asked the man with a shield who came to the rally, who told me repeatedly he just wanted to get home to his daughters. An intelligent reader will be like, why does he have a shield? I don't have to say it. If anyone read the article about Johnstown, where the reporter went back a year later to see if the voters who voted for Trump changed their minds or if they felt differently, that reporter didn't have to do anything but record those people talking. They let me know exactly who they are. It didn't matter to me. That could have been a black reporter. All he did was say, do you think Obama's the devil? And they said whatever they were going to say, and he put it right there in the paper. So
one of the guys, this dude was trying not to say anything, and the girl was like, nah, say it.
Yeah, at the end.
Say it.
But the thing is, like, so then I don't have to, if I'm putting this together or this is an interview, I don't have to two-sided. I mean, the host asked the question that we all want to hear, and they let us know who they are. And sometimes those things, we don't have to, it's like I think we stress out about getting in the middle of it and being objective. And sometimes when you just put what people are saying out there, the two sides emerge without you having to do anything. And I think there's a lot of cases where that's what happens in the reporting, is that, yeah, I may be a black journalist covering this thing, I may be covering someone or a group of people who are denying my very humanity, right? So, I mean, I'm not probably happy about it, and I'm not happy about the things that they're saying, but if I have to go get their story, I'm gonna let them talk, because invariably they're going to say something that is going to let the reader or the listener know exactly who they are. And so then I just come in and I'm saying, in searching for voices among the crowd, I ran into Robert, who had a shield and a mask on his face because he was here to protect free speech. You already have a visual of Robert in your head. If you know me, you Google me online, you know what I look like. I don't have to tell you anything more. You already know. So sometimes those things appear and we don't have to work so hard to be like, did I represent everyone equally?
So next we want to talk about inequality, specifically starting with the criminal justice system. And Don, this question will be directed to you, and one or two panelists can answer as well. How do you fairly report on systems that are historically rooted in racism and prejudices?
You know, I think it's really important. Nobody likes to be lectured to. So I very much agree with the idea that if you come in and you're hooking people with a story and you're showing, I like to show people and let them think whatever they think, rather than tell them what to think. So, can you play that second clip?
We just have the first one, but you can describe it a bit if you want to.
Okay. So, you know, in Gideons Army, for example, it's featured a young man who was, you know, he was in Atlanta, suburban Atlanta. He had his, you know, pants down around, like half-mast. You know, my grandmother would be the first one to be like, pull those pants up. But, you know, I think, and I'm positive about this, it was very much the case that if most of us, you know, many of us came at night and this young man and his friends were walking towards them, attempted to cross the street. He looked really, you know, a lot of people said to me, he looked so menacing. Right, the kid was 16 years old. So I have a 16-year-old. I don't think he looks menacing, but, you know, I'm sure people think he does. And so the way that I introduced him was at his house, his mother, and his younger siblings. And then, you know, it kind of just came to me while we were there. I had his mother show us his baby pictures and go through his photo album. And she says what every mother says, you know, about one of their children. DeMontes was a very good baby. And she shows this picture of him, adorable. And then she goes through his years. And so by the end of that, like 45 seconds, you're just like, oh, DeMontes is like my baby. Because every mother says DeMontes, their baby is a good baby or a good sleeper, right? We all know, like, someone's like, she was a very good sleeper. And you have to find those ways, unfortunately, to not humanize, but fill out the portrait we have of people who we don't live among. And so I love doing that. Now I'll tell you, on the flip side, this was my first film, and my one producer and one editor, and I had this scene that I loved where he was like tutoring his little sister who was 5. And he would help her with he would pick her up, he would help her with his homework. And the comment I got back from some of the white members of the team was, that doesn't seem credible, right? And you know, I thought about it, and this is where I wouldn't have to explain that to a black crew, I think. You know, and I caved on that because I thought so many other things, and I'm really sorry I did. But I mean, I think we got his humanity across, but you know, like the fact that I'm still talking about it all these years later, like it still bothers me, just that one little section. But I think if you ease into, like by the end, these people who would have crossed the street from this young man were praying for his trial. We went all the way through his trial. And I think that's when you can, you know, the light bulb goes off for people themselves without me saying, you know, you would have crossed the street. And now you're crying over his fate. And I hope that makes some change. And that's where, you know, we have the advantage of pictures.
Does one other panelist want to comment on covering historically racist and prejudiced systems?
Yes, I'll do that. What I find is even though the data is there, people don't want to just see numbers. They want to actually see humans tied to it. So what I try to do, because I have no doubt that the criminal justice system is inherently racist. We make money off putting black and brown people into prison. Well, not me, but they make money off of that. But how do you explain that? And so I try to find real people to do that. When I wanted to write about Oakland's dwindling black population, it wasn't enough to just say, oh, it's 28% down from this percentage points. I went out and found someone who had their house repossessed because of a predatory loan.
Right.
And it, in an area that, 30 years ago, they wouldn't have loaned money to black people. So it just shows like how this financial obsession has like, it's not so much gentrification, it's really like taking away access to financial resources to black people. Another thing is like, when you say, oh, there's a lot of homeless in Oakland, it's not enough to just show the numbers. You got to go out there and talk to people and show them that if Oakland, and there's only 28% black in Oakland, but yet 2/3 of the homeless people are black people in Oakland, which, like, how do those numbers, like, they shouldn't be that way. And same with the criminal justice system, but I try to put faces to what I'm writing about and give you the story, like Dawn was saying, like humanize the story. So this is not a statistic. You can talk to this person, or you can say this person's name. You see this person's face. I, paint a portrait of this person as they go through the system, and you're like, okay, this is a human. This is not 28% or 30% or whatever the percentage point is.
And we're going to go to the one final question for all of the panelists. What would you say is the most crucial duty for a black journalist today?
Oh, me? Being good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like how I do is probably gonna have an impact on future journalists. Like I need to be good, and I probably need to be better than everybody else. I don't know if I can just be good enough to kind of blend in. Like that's the best thing I can do is take the craft seriously, like really diligently try to get better, and be so good at it that the next person who comes in looks like me. Like you kind of got to give them a shot. I just left the Mercury News. It's so funny too. I left the Mercury News, and they're asking me about hires. So their pool is like, what do you think about this? And the only candidates they're asking me about were the black ones. And I'm like, are you trying to find a new me? And they were like, well, yeah, we need another Marcus Thompson. I'm like, first off, there's no other. But it was just funny. Like, they're like, we got to get another one in here. And I was like, all right, well, that's good. And they ended up hiring, another young black kid. But I just feel like if I'm good, like it helps everything. Not only are we getting great stories told and we're kind of changing the landscape, it just creates more opportunity. So that's what I feel is most important for me.
I guess for me, most of my journalism career, I've been a producer. And for me, it's been really important to make my way into whatever room decisions are being made. And when I speak to younger journalists, particularly journalists of color, I remind them, if you're a host or a presenter, which there's like a lot of glitz and glamour and everyone wants to like be on TV, I'm like, at the moment that your monitor tells you to say something, you can either stumble and not say it, and the viewer thinks there's something wrong with you, or you say it and the viewer thinks that it's your words and you take responsibility for it. And I've always been really determined to be in the room, to be able to make decisions, to say, we're not airing that. We're not playing that tape. We're not doing that story. I have killed a lot of stories, and I've killed a lot of tape. And I'm really proud of that, because I feel like that's, as well as representation, you know, in front of the microphone and in front of the camera, we need people to point out that a news spot on Paula Deen's Brand South does not need to air because it's about nothing. And we can go through the motions of trying to put it together and be objective and tell both sides, but at the end of the day, what happened? It didn't air. And I can highlight that and say that's not going on the air. If it goes on the air, I'm gonna have a serious problem. And I work here and I'm an integral part of the show, so you have to respect what I'm saying. And I think that as much as representation, there needs to be more people in the room to make sure that coverage is more balanced, to make sure that all of the voices that need to be heard are being heard. And it's really hard to make those decisions sometimes when you're at the end of the chain. If you're the person that's given the material that someone wrote for you, if you're the person that has to be the face of the station or the show, sometimes it's hard to go all the way back to say, like, how did this even become a story? Why is this in my hand? Who decided that? And I like to be the person to interject that and be like, well, you know, if you tell that story, here's how it's gonna look. Well, you know, you can't ask a business owner, a black business owner of an all-black business why she doesn't sound black. You can't say that, because what does black sound like? And I think that there need to be people in the room that can bring those things up and say those things. And oftentimes, by the time the copy's written, by the time, you know, the on-air is on, it's hard to scramble and to take those things back and adjust. So, I mean, I like to be in the positions to make decisions to make sure out the gate things are as balanced and diverse as they can be.
Pretty simple for me. Read, gotta have knowledge, and you gotta be up to date on your history, personal history, and history of the environment you're working in. 2, curiosity. The best are curious, and if you're not curious, then you can't do this job. And 3, stay out of the office. You can't get the stories sitting at your desk, looking at the internet, picking up the phone.
Right.
Go walk your beat. Get out there, shake hands, hand out business cards, talk to people. I mean, right before we started, I had a source call me and was like, guess what happened with the Vallejo Police Department? It's like, thank you for calling. I'm glad we met. So, yeah, read, be curious, stay out of the office.
I agree with everything that's been said, and particularly you have to put the time in, and you have to be really good. And I think it's really also important to think like the people who have the jobs above you, who have the green light, because she's exactly right. If you come and ask people who have put in all these hours lining up a script and pulling footage and at the end say, I don't like that, then you're a problem. But if you come at the beginning and help people so they avoid the problem, then you're helpful, right? And you're part of a team instead of being this, she always says no, or she's difficult. So it's really important to think outside of your own objectives and how you wanna forge your path. You know, I always try and think of like, how am I gonna convince this person, or how am I gonna help them see what will be a better story, a better piece. And then the only other thing I would say is you do need to be resilient, and you just gotta have a thick skin about stuff. And you know what, it's the real world. You're gonna get your feelings hurt, and you know, that's part of it. So if you get your feelings hurt all the time, then you should sit in your room and play video games, because you know, interacting with people is gonna get your feelings hurt. So, you know, being on point with your facts and being helpful to your team and being good at what you do, you're a lot less likely to get your feelings hurt.
Well, thank you to all of the panelists. Hearing your experiences has been great, and we want to turn to the Q&A portion of our event. If Lee can come up. She will have a microphone, and if you have a question, please feel free to stand up and Lee will hand you the mic. We want to keep it brief because we only have 30 minutes for Q&A, so We'll start with questions.
I mean, I can start.
Oh, yeah.
I just really wanted to know what, Otis, you had that point about immigration reporting, and I'm in one of the immigration reporting courses that we have here, and I would like to hear what you have to say about the lack of coverage on that topic.
So I was fortunate enough, I got this tip that female ICE detainees were having to use the bathroom in bags in their cells. And I brought that to my editor and was like, I want to write about this. And she was like, okay, how much time do you need? Like, all right, I need, I don't know, a couple days just to report it. What I needed to find was someone else. And through my reporting, I found that these women in the West County Detention Facility are being treated differently. The female ICE detainees are being treated differently from the regular county inmates. It's not just access to the bathroom. It's access to hygiene products. It's access to health care. And I found that these immigrants, and many of them who don't speak English, are just being abused up there, and no one cares. Why? Because they're not from here. We're making America great again. So the federal government doesn't care. And I feel that that's one of my jobs. I need to care about these women because they're mothers. They're mothers of US born children. And they're sitting in a detention facility with only a civil charge. There's no criminal charge. They're just sitting up there because they're not born here. And I wish that were more of the narrative, and that's what I'm saying about immigrants. We're talking about perspective of, right now there's the OPD assisted ICE on a raid on a family, but the story's on like what OPD did, it's a sanctuary city, did the mayor read the letter? It's like, well, what happened to the family, And what about the families that live around them? Are they scared? Like, why was this family targeted? And that's why I want to switch the narrative, because it's like there are real people, humans, being affected every day, and that's what we should care about, not because some dude in Washington wants, immigrants gone. Screw him.
All right, for Marcus regarding sports, it seems like with the kneeling talk with football and with Jamel Hill, kind of coming out and I think talking and saying things that a lot of black people feel. All the narrative of the sports is that black athletes are the faces, but we don't really want to hear what they have to say. We just want to watch them on the field, and they're kind of just like pawns in a game. What kind of stories, or are there any stories in particular that you think of that you thought you had to tell through the black lens? And have you gotten pushback from sports fans who say they don't want to hear about the black experience, they just want to enjoy the game?
Yeah, I've written a lot of those articles. When it first all happened, I remember when Kaepernick first kneeled, it was a big thing, and they wanted me to write, and I was like, I kind of need to sit on this, because, man, hella people don't stand for the anthem. I'm talking about like media.
Right.
Like, it's the most wasted 2 minutes of our day, right? It's like, man, let me go get this hot dog. Oh, the anthem, I got more time, right? So I was, but I remember part of what really touched me is like the faux rage about military. I felt like I had to say that because people were like, you're disrespecting the military. And I'm like, the whole country disrespects the military. Like, you really don't care about the military, right? So let's stop using that, because like we just show them we don't care. Like, they're homeless, they're hurting, they have no medical care, like, and they come back to nothing. So we're like, oh, military support our troops. Like, I'm mad at you because you disrespected our troops. And the whole country disrespects the troops, right? So I had to tell that story. I felt like when Kaepernick started actually doing stuff, and people were like, you're not gonna spend your money, put your money where your mouth is, and then he started doing it, I felt like somebody had to be like, hey, he's spending money, right? Like, the pushback is just part of it now. Like, that's just the way it is. word's not going to the White House. Like, I already know, like, the moment you press send on the tweet or whatever, it's just going to happen. We are that divided. Nobody's listening. So from what I found is just that it's just part of the discourse. Like, there will be people who will rage, and there will be people who will be like, yeah, and then there's like no in between, right? It's just rage or love. So I just like, hey man, there are some stories that have to be told. Like Anquan Bolden, there are people who are like not in the public eye, not doing a lot, but behind the scenes they're like arguing with congressmen, trying to change policy. Like, we need to tell that story. So that's what I try to do. I try to find the stories that like get out of the back and forth and kind of into like what's really happening. Like Steph going after his own CEO, you know, it's stuff like that that I want to tell.
And Avene also has a mic in the back for those.
Hi, anyone can answer my question. As a student Black journalist, I'm finding a really hard time using my Twitter and social media accounts because I don't want to say something that might affect me having a job in the future, but then I have professor and friends who are like, girl, your account has nothing but your articles. Like, I know you have an opinion. And I'm like, I really don't know what to say. I don't know what to post. I don't even like posting pictures sometimes. I don't like retweeting my friends. Like, I'm just very like over, I guess, protective of what to say because I don't want it to hurt me down the line. Does anyone have advice on how to gauge your personal account but still being a journalist?
You are very wise. I've already known a couple of, literally, like at the Athletic, we were hiring people, and I was like, man, you gotta get this guy. And he was like, yeah, he's pretty good, but ooh, I can't stand him on Twitter. And he literally didn't get the job because he didn't like him on Twitter. Like, it's that superficial. There's a part, like you said before, like, I mean, there is a part where you just can't be scared. You know, like, there's gotta be a little element of gangster. Like, I'm gonna do this. That's how I was. I always felt like if I'm good, like, what y'all gonna do? Fire me, I'm gonna get another job because y'all can't stop me. So there has to be some element of, I'm gonna say it, but you know, tact is always good. I think you are wise for thinking about it. I think reckless young reporters saying anything have cost themselves plenty of jobs by doing that. So I would commend you for doing that. There's a balance between being gangster and being smart. So they are right, say something, you know, but you know, you gotta use your wisdom in that situation.
I think that I'm like you. I'm very careful because I read a million things a day that I want to retweet with comment. I think one thing that might work, and I go in and out of doing this, but one thing that might work is to curate your feed and to tweet about things that you know, that you care about, like along vertical. So we know if we go to your Twitter feed, you really care about inequities in housing, so we'll see those tweets. You really care about the prison industrial complex, so we'll see those tweets and possible commentary on that. You love music, so we'll see those tweets. And maybe figure out a way to have a social media presence that is about things that you care about, but allows you to have a presence that you don't feel jeopardizes your future job. I think I see a lot of, I'm really bad at it, but I do see a lot of my former colleagues and friends, they're able to do that and tweet like, isn't this interesting? Or they'll find a money fact in there and they'll retweet with a fact that they found interesting. And those are ways to share the information and leave your personal commentary out of it. So we try to do that, and then we have a whole group chat that is the minute any article drops, where we are just rage texting each other about, did you see this, did you read that? So that we can handle getting that kind of out, but publicly facing, we are being more responsible. Because nowadays, people are pulling tweets from 2011.
Right.
And I was trying to think, like, what was I tweeting in 2011? So I think that you just have to kind of, knowing that you want to be a journalist and you don't know who's watching, this is a very divided time, I think you have to be strategic. But it doesn't mean you have to be silent, because you can find out, you can figure out ways to kind of put things out. So it's like, this is not abnormal. She always comments on politics in the South. This is not abnormal. She loves trap music, and so we're going to expect that from her. This is not abnormal, and you begin to develop a personality that allows you to kind of put it out there, but keeps you away from the landmines.
I need you running my Twitter. I need you running my Twitter. That's pretty good.
Hi, thanks so much for this great panel. This is awesome. I wanted to ask about sources. So I am a health reporter, and oftentimes we're reaching out to scientists or experts, and I find it really challenging sometimes to have sourcing that is representative of the community that you're reporting on, especially in the health community. There's a big disparity in representation in people who are providing care or talking about care and people who are receiving it. So I'm wondering if you guys can speak to that, trying to make your sourcing diverse, or just your perspective on writing those kinds of stories.
I can say something quickly and then I'll stop talking. This was my exact job as the healthcare debate was raging and we were hearing the same people. So the advice that I would give you, particularly like in the sciences and things like that, is realize the people who are always called are always used to being called. The people who are not being called are not used to being called. So that means looking for people that may potentially be a source, not today, but next week, cultivating that source. There's a woman she was at Rice at the time. She'd been on like regional radio in Texas. Healthcare economist, brilliant woman, Vivian Ho. I called her, I was like, what do you like to talk about? What's your slice of this healthcare debate? I don't have anything today, but when this specific thing comes up, I'm calling you. And I called her, and we put her on all the time, and then we couldn't get her, right? So it's about cultivating, if you're on a beat, look for those sources, be intentional. I'm gonna call this guy about this strand of economics. I don't need him today, but I might need him, or he might be the person to introduce me to someone else, so that you have those calls on the ready, and then they're waiting for your call. They'll answer your call because they're like, oh, she wants to talk to me about this specific thing. I think the people that we always go to are used to always being gone to. So that's their business. They just pick up the phone, we use the same talking heads, and then you hear things like, oh, nobody else is out there. It's like, well, you didn't call anybody else. Did you call Rice? Did you call Morehouse? Did you call Rutgers? No, you called Harvard. You called George Washington. You called Stanford, and you got your person from there. So it's about cultivating those things, particularly if you have a beat, so that you have people to go to.
Can I just say, again, at ABC, that was also my job. Was the reporters, we were constantly using the same, 4 people, and they were all white men. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot wrong with that. But one thing is, they're not the best stories. Right. You're not getting a full perspective. And the people who are not called all the time, often have gems. Yes. That you're not, I tune out when I hear the 5 same people come up and show, because I think they're phoning it in, because I've heard it 3 times already. So I want to hear from somebody different. I'm not picking somebody because of their race, but I'm looking for the best sources. So when producers told us we can't find anybody, we were like, you know what, go make a list, and don't come back until you have a list of 90 people on your beat, or however many people you can find, and I want to hear that you've consulted that list, and that person's not the best person to go on. And then once they created the list, you just had to be pushed. So in this case, you have a beat. This is your Bible, right? Do you want to write the same story and hear from the same people that everybody else is going to? What fun is that? So there's gems of people who are out there, but that's where you really have to. It's hard. I'm not saying it's not hard, but it's not as hard as you think. And if you make it a priority, I'm confident that you can do it. And then other people will be following in your shoes, following your story. So.
Yeah, and do it when you're not reporting something.
Yeah.
Don't do it on deadline.
Yeah.
I've been the Chronicle for a year, and I'm still asking people if they want to get coffee, a couple of weeks, hey, can we get together? Can we get together on this weekend? Can I talk to you about this, or can I just run this by you? that was like probably the best advice on, like, East Bay's kind of vast, and there's no way I can get to know city council in, you know, Walnut Creek, or have a source out there unless I'm calling somebody and asking them. The one thing I don't want to do is when something happens in Walnut Creek, I don't want to be parachuting in there, because then it's like, yeah, you're going to be getting the same stuff that everyone else is getting. So, I mean, you've got to define beats. Yeah, pick up the phone, like, hey, do you want to meet, or do you want to have a chat about this this week? And make the friends, make the contacts. Friends. How many of us
You've all worked in predominantly white organizations, and I'm just curious if you had the opportunity to make one suggestion to a predominantly white board of directors of the kind of organizations you work with about how they could make their organizations an easier place for you to work, a better place for you to work, make your work as a journalist better. What one recommendation would you make to the people who really make the decisions in that organization?
hire more people of color.
Yes.
It's pretty, hire more women and hire more people of color. Women of color primarily for me. It's pretty simple. Diversify your workforce, man, and you'll get more out of that. It's pretty simple. I mean, to me, there's nothing more said.
Actually, I will add to that, and pay them well.
Fairly,
Yeah,
yes,
pay
yes.
them
Yeah.
like don't give them just, hey man, I got you a job, you know, so be happy you got a job, take this, like pay them well and watch the work.
Well, here's an example that, so in Silicon Valley, there's this, oh, how do we diversify, right? Like, we don't know how to do this. And then I met a young woman who worked for a company in Silicon Valley, and she calls to stir because when she quit, she wrote a Medium post of how it was to work in that company as a black female. And so she decided to help Silicon Valley by starting something called Tech Jobs Tours, where it says, you can't find any black candidates, you can't find any brown candidates, you can't find any female candidates, well, let me bring them to you. Qualified candidates. And there's still that barrier, like, oh, well, because they're not from Stanford, or they're not from Harvard, or not from Cal. Well, that's a problem, guys. Your products could get a lot better if you get input from other places. And I find that very hard to believe that if Facebook wanted to, if Google wanted to diversify, they can, because they have the pick of the litter. They're only not diversifying because they don't want to. Same thing I say with the Chronicle. If you wanted to hire more women or more black and brown people, you could. Because we've got enough white men here in the building. They've been here for like 40 years. Like, let's diversify. You know why? Because you would reach a wider audience. We go into East Oakland, people, like, why are you here? And it's like, oh, that's my bad. I'm here to tell your story. Like, oh, we don't get the Chronicle here. I was like, all right, but I'm still here. Let me talk to you.
I think I'll piggyback on both what Otis and Mark both said. Is one of the things that I did do that I think people often overlook is, particularly in journalism and in newsrooms, there's a complaint that you can't find journalists of color who are trained for the job. And one of the things that we did that I'm very proud of doing at my last job is I took over the internship program and created a pipeline. It's like, oh, you don't know where they are? Great. They'll start as our interns, they'll be trained as our production assistants, they'll be trained as our assistant producers, you'll give them temp jobs. When their real jobs are open, they'll be very competitive candidates because they've been raised up through the ranks, they know our systems, they know our work, and they're good. And they're good because they were good when they came to us, but then any deficits they had, we made them good. We made them perfect for our shop. So now there's no reason that we can't utilize them. And I think you know, oftentimes there's this panic about finding all these people, and there's not young people, there's not people that are trained this way or that way. It's very simple to create programs oftentimes, because oftentimes companies have the money to create the program to develop the type of employee that they want. And that's something that the people in charge have the power to do. And so in creating that pipeline, I was like, look, I'm gonna answer this question. No one's ever gonna say this again. And we have people that have come through that had stayed at the show, that went on to work for the LA Times, the New York Times, for StoryCorps, NPR and DC, and it's like, yes, because they were trained. So we can't say that we don't know where they are, because we're finding them and making them good candidates. So I think inherent in that, though, is the commitment, is the desire to want to do it. And a lot of times, I think, particularly in spaces where you're grant funded, you develop the right language and what you care about, and you say like, oh, we care about diversity, and we really would love this $150,000 from Ford to cover, you know, food deserts in Detroit. And it's like, but with that $150,000, you don't hire anybody that looks any different. You don't do any different stories, but you got the money because you know the talk. So a lot of times I think people, there's no intent behind it. But if there is, I think, you know, creating a pipeline, you know, is one way to ensure that you'll have those type of candidates and employees for a long time.
And you know what else I would add to that is, one of the things I learned is with the athletic, like, we got a couple VC guys who don't know journalism. They certainly don't know women or black journalists, right? So, like, I have to help them with this. And I remember this at the Mercury News, like, this search for diversity is really only looking for the exceptional black journalists or the exceptional women journalists. And it's like, one of the parallels I make in sports is that, like, look, dude, you need somebody to be the ninth man. And they can be black too. Like, you could just that average dude who's just cool, like, he can get a job too. The woman, like, you don't have to wait or be only in search of the most exceptional black woman out there. The average one can get a job too, right? Because you do have to feel like, so that's where I think part of it is like, well, yeah, I'm looking, there's these 7 over here, but they're just cool. But I want that one special one. Like, yeah, it's a bunch of okay journalists here too. Like, and sometimes, you know, somebody got to be the 11th man, right? Somebody's got to come off the bench and just play a little defense. Like, we can do that too.
We have a question in the back.
Oh, I was just gonna add to that, saying like, for us, it's like if I have my degree from Northwestern, it's still not as good as someone with a degree from a state school, from Penn State. So just really just piggybacking on that, it's like, what are the criteria of greatness or talent or what have you, and why do we always have to sort of like advocate for ourselves as to why we can do, there's a lot of white mediocrity in every single workplace, and so, but still they're looking for this like, you know, this level of exceptionalism that really is just a product of white supremacy, if you ask me. But.
Is that a question?
No, just an alley-oop, just the alley-oop. We have one over here.
Thank you all. This is Millie, you were talking about when you're at the rally and there's a person with a shield, let them speak for themselves so the readers can connect the dots and see the person for who they are. What is your thinking on walking the line between exposing abhorrent and racist views and maybe inadvertently giving them more play or power by doing so?
I mean, for me, I think that making them a part of your story, I think you have a variety of ways to do that. Like, I'm not a person that would give tons of airtime to I think we pretty much know if it's someone famous that's racist or it's someone that's from a certain position. It's like you get to a point where you pretty much know that story or what they're gonna say. So as a journalist, you're also looking for the nuances. So I also don't think it's responsible to just be like, and I went here and this person told me, you know, like, it's about free speech for the 97th time. It's like, if I'm a journalist, I know the lines that are gonna happen. It's the, you know, I'm doing this for my kids and I'm not racist, this is fair. And so as a journalist, if I'm going into that situation, I'm trying to figure out what are the other stories? Like, what else can I get into this? Like, when did this person believe this all the time? Where are you from? Oh, you're from Los Angeles? Like, what part of Los Angeles are you from? Interesting. Where did you grow up? What was school like for you? Try to get at something different, because I think even you can take the information that you know and you can make a departure, and it can still be a great anecdote, and it can still be a story, and it can still be something that illuminates who this person is. So then you're telling this human story about this person whose views you may or may not agree with, but you're not giving the same, kind of elevator pitch, elevator speech. You're not giving that air, and you're not giving that platform. You're trying to figure out, something else. For example, one of my former J School colleagues and good friends is a senior producer on Vice News and was involved in the segment in Charlottesville. They just followed that man, and he was saying all kinds of things, and he wanted to fight and bring it on and all that. Literally 24 hours later, he was crying in his hotel room like, I hope they don't come get me. They didn't have to do anything but record that man. He didn't say anything surprising. But what I appreciated is they got in there and they just let him talk, and he essentially hung himself. Because 24 hours later, after they said, oh, we saw you on the TV inciting violence, we're looking for you, there's a warrant out for your arrest, cut to him crying in a hotel room, worried that someone's gonna come get him and he doesn't know what he's gonna do. So it's kind of like, I think there are nuances in storytelling that allow you to just not, I think sometimes when we think of two sides, journalists get lazy. And they're like, oh, I gotta, if I have this person, then I gotta have the person who is racist that doesn't believe in equality. Because I talked to this other person, I have to have this other thing. And it doesn't have to be so stark. I think we are trained to find the nuances and the stories in that. And I think we should be doing that.
Great, we have time for one more question.
So my question is kind of based off of what Don was talking about earlier, having to cut that one clip from the piece. I'm curious if there's a pitch that you all have given in the past, or some story that you really wanted to tell that you just couldn't get the green light for. And if you found some alternative way to tell that as, the news line has progressed and time has gone on, or a piece of advice you have to give so that, a younger self could have gotten that idea pitch so you could tell that story.
You want me to go? Are you gonna go, Jill?
Yeah, I'll start. So I think part of this is my inexperience and self-doubt in how my persistence would be perceived, right? Because you have colleagues you love. These are not like racist, no, I don't want to hear this. These are people you respect. So I think now that I'm more confident and definitely more in charge, I don't feel like I have those same issues. But I do think when you're starting out, like I said earlier, you should practice what your pitch is going to be and how you're going to tell this story. And if your pitch is really good, so that was one scene in a 90-minute film. But if your main topic, if the main thing you're going for involves something that could be racially complicated or gender complicated or whatever the controversial thing about abortion, whatever it is. The big thing is to know your audience. And there's some places that are just not going to go for it. And there's some places, like if you research the history of what they've done, maybe they haven't gone all the way there, but they've done some stories or they've done some pieces that indicate they might be up for it. So people have broadcast something you have to pitch to the right place. They don't want to shock their viewers with something that's a left turn. So if you can say, this is right in line, it's not the same, but it's right in line with your series on poverty, or here's another angle that I think would really work well with that, and that, so do your research about your pitch. So it's not just your opinion, but you gotta tailor your pitch to people. And that doesn't mean pull back on the thing you really wanna say, but think about it from their perspective. What's gonna get a green light for a network executive is it's so much easier to say no. So you wanna give them all the reasons to say yes, and what they love to say yes to, topics that have worked well for them before. But you could broaden your topic, right? Then you get to go execute it. And then when it's great, no one's gonna question you about it, So I think it's doing your homework up front and not just saying, I wanna do the most controversial thing you've ever had. Nobody takes that pitch. They take something that says, I wanna expand upon themes you can flatter them a little bit. You've been, in this area, and I think I can go deeper with it because I have another perspective to broaden this story. Or I have the most tantalizing story ever, and make your pitch really, really good, So I think that there's definitely a way to do it. I also think, don't be worried so much about, particularly when you're starting, about getting your best thing out there. You actually want to get a little time under your belt and so you may want to save your best thing, Get a grant so you can shoot or something, put it in your pocket, let it breathe. Because when you come out with that, you want it to be fantastic. So you don't want to, don't worry if you think that there's not an opportunity right then, just stay in the pocket, just wait a little bit and find out where there would be a good partner for you.
I'm gonna piggyback off of what Dawn said, and I would say, even sometimes when your pitch is perfect, it's not gonna be accepted for reasons that you don't understand. So I think you always give it your best shot. You're not gonna win every battle, even when you're right. A quick anecdote, I tore my newsroom apart over the Trayvon Martin ruling. We knew it was coming on Saturday. Everybody knew. We were ready with pitches on Monday. All kinds of angles, the best angles, all the best angles. There were no less than 30 pitches. I knew it was a tough story. It's a race story. It's about a young man's death. It's very separated. But as a national news organization, it was my belief that the biggest story in the nation and arguably in the world that Monday, we had a responsibility to tell that story. I went to war with the executive producer. We had an all-staff meeting. I was screamed at in front of the staff. I was not backing down. I was convinced that if I was losing my job, it was probably happening this week. And I lost. We didn't do anything. When we did something, I think they put something on the air maybe that Friday, which is, the verdict was the Saturday before. But I say that to say, I lost. And after that though, they were in Ferguson immediately because they realized that sometimes you can't sit on the sideline. So it's very much about what people are comfortable with and what they feel comfortable with and what they feel comfortable to saying yes. But I think it's important that if you feel something is important, not to get personally defeated, because you may not win this time, but for me, for them to mobilize 2 reporters and a producer to Ferguson immediately, like get on a plane this afternoon, that was a win. And every situation like that afterwards, because I feel like my fight was like, no, we're a national show. There's economics and everything. There's money everywhere. You can start with how much police departments put aside for civil rights abuses. Every police department has a fund in the millions of dollars. That's your way in, any way in. But to say you're gonna be rejected, even when you're right, you're not gonna win every battle, but sometimes you have no idea what difference that will make. You know, it may come about a little bit later.
Any last thoughts from any of the panelists?
Warriors lost.
Oh, sorry, Marcus. But you got to spend the evening being with us. Yeah.
Great conversation.
All right.
I mean, I personally have learned so much from listening to you all. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you all for coming.